So for some closing reflections on what we've explored tonight, I'm going to ask Professor Alexander Dawson, from the Professor of History and Director of the Latin American Studies Program, to help us weave some of these ideas together. Professor Dawson?
I'm over here. Is this on? I'd like to start by reading to you Article 25 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it was adopted by the United Nations in 1948. Canada, as well as I think 140 other nations, were signatories of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And one of the things that it does is it articulates a series of human experiences as rights, not privileges, not opportunities, but as absolute rights. Article 25 reads this: everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and his family. Okay, it's 1940s, they're not about gender equity. Including food, clothing, housing, and medical care, and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, and other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his/her control. I think about this. I come back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights for a number of reasons. The first reason is that it didn't frame it. I mean, John Harris's briefing paper was wonderful, but the Universal Declaration, it doesn't claim poverty alleviation as an opportunity or a need or a desire. It claims it as a right, and it claims it as a responsibility of signatories to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I remind you, before I make my formal remarks, that as a signatory to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Canada committed itself not to the alleviation of poverty in Canada, but to the alleviation of poverty. I've heard a lot of sort of sentiments and phrases over the course of this evening, and I want to kind of share some of the things that I think that I've heard, and then finish by raising a couple of questions about things that I'm not sure I have heard and that I think maybe we might want to talk about. I've heard a lot about empathy through the specific, through familiarity, through family, through a connection to the soil, through longing, longing for a past, remembering that past, remembering the connection to that past, and how important that is as members of the diaspora. I've heard about what I'm phrasing, the idea of local knowledge in two locales, members of the diaspora understanding what's going on the ground, where they come from or where their forefathers, foremothers come from, but also understanding what's on the ground here and having forms of expertise here that they feel uniquely, or that they are perhaps uniquely prepared to act as Ms. Arriaga talked about, building bridges between here and there because of their knowledge of there and their knowledge of here, their expertise. I've heard not about tensions, but I think what some might term the tensions between the idea of charitable work and empowerment, and what is charitable and what is empowerment, and how do we turn charity into empowerment, and about the challenges of turning charity into empowerment. I've heard a lot about change. The word change has come up repeatedly, but it's not always clear what change is or where change is going. I've heard the word home a great deal, and I got to tell you, this is one of the phrases that I'm most curious and perhaps even most uncomfortable about. I always loved the phrase, Papa was a rolling stone, wherever he laid his hat was his home. And I like that because I have spent my life migrating from place to place to place to place, and again in my life being confronted with the comment, you're not from around here, right? When I hear you're not from around here, I like to think, well, who's to say where I'm from? And I think members of the diaspora are continually, particularly members from the diaspora who can be identified because of skin color or because of aspects of class, or as not from this kind of sanitized white version of Canadian society, are continually asked, where are you from, right? And there's a moment in this dialogue where we're asking members of the diaspora to make their from somewhere else, and I'm not always sure that I'm not sure that that's the right thing to do. I think sometimes the from that I'm from from Kitsilano, or I'm from, the Vancouver East Side, and that from is important. It might be sort of connected to something that an academic might call interstitiality, which is a fancy word for meaning between two places, right? But I'm not even sure that that's right. I mean, members of the diaspora may be from here and they may be from there, and it's that negotiation and that choosing of where you're from that I think is an important question. The last thing that I've heard is a lot of talk about the specific places, specific knowledge, specific actions. What I haven't really heard a lot about is the universal, and that's where I want to sort of pose my highly problematic questions as we go forward. I'm going to read these questions because I want to get them right. The first question, there's 3 questions, and then a brief commentary at the end. In highlighting the work of the diaspora here, is it possible that we are inadvertently shifting the responsibility for the human beings who live in less wealthy countries towards emigrants from those countries and away from the global community as a whole, as was sort of articulated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? Number 2, in focusing on these stories, are we failing to recognize the ways in which wealthy nations are complicit in the poverty of poorer nations through policies that have acted to shift wealth, both material and human capital, away from these countries and into the hands of wealthier countries? I think Amos, but June also mentioned that when she talked about the Jamaican brain drain. The Jamaican brain drain is something that has enriched Canada a great deal, and there are those that argue with very good evidence that it has been crippling to certain sectors in Jamaican society. Number 3, what role can diasporas play in not just aiding the people from their countries of origin, but in changing policies in countries such as Canada so that Canada and other countries break cycles that have in fact increased poverty and inequality in poorer nations, even as we have promoted a self-image that is at odds with that reality? I think Amos's point is right on there. And this is my final sort of comment on these questions. I ask these questions because of a discomfort I have, because of a silence that I believe needs to be ruptured. I see us telling a story here. I see an important story of personal sacrifice, earnest efforts, and change that we ought to embrace. But I wonder if in telling these stories, we have not told the story of a larger relationship that cannot be spoken about in such complementary terms. I wonder how we as Canadians would react if a member of the Guatemalan diaspora was to tell us that our laws and practices are complicit in deepening poverty and environmental degradation in their country. I wonder how the Canadian government would react if a member of the Haitian diaspora told them that our aid policies are poorly planned, ineffective, and mostly aid Canadian businesses. I wonder if we are really ready to listen to those who want to tell us that this is not just the diaspora's problem, that it is our problem. Indeed, that we are part of the problem. Thank you very much for your time.